The poor have the gospel preached to him, therefore, does not just mean the poor who didn't have any money. That's what I'm trying to say. The poor meant all kinds of poor, the socially poor. And people that are poor in other ways,
Jesus, we enthrone you. We proclaim you are King. Standing here in the midst of us, we raise you up with our praise. And as we worship, build your throne. And as we worship, build your throne. And as we worship, build your throne. Come, Lord Jesus, and take your place. Jesus, we enthrone you. We proclaim you are standing here in the midst of us. We raise you up with our praise. And as we worship, build your throne. And as we worship, build your throne. And as we worship, build your throne. Come, Lord Jesus, and take your. And as we worship, and as we worship, build your throne. And as we worship, build your throne. And as we worship, build your throne. Come, Lord Jesus, and take. See one more time. As we worship, let's worship Him. And as we worship, build your throne. And as we worship, build your throne. And as we worship, build your throne. Come, Lord Jesus, and take your place.
material things are inherently evil is wrong. It is a wrong philosophy. It is wrong doctrine, wrong theology. Anything that says that material things are wrong is evil. Material things are good because they are created by God for our good. It can be used in an evil way, but it is created for our good. It is basically good. So even people that follow the monastic tradition who have given up everything in life, they say that interpretation is wrong. And you may say, well, then why did they follow the monastic lifestyle? This is the second kind of interpretation. Their interpretation of these material things and why they should not have is, they say Jesus never commanded us to give up material possessions. We did it voluntarily. We do it voluntarily. It is our choosing. We decided for our own spiritual good, for our own spiritual welfare, so that we may grow and spiritually and have a higher level of spirituality. We thought these physical things, these material things may be a hindrance to our spiritual life. We gave that all up. Voluntarily we did that. So these people look at the radical demand of Jesus, such as leave everything, sell everything, give everything to the poor and come and follow me. They see it not as a command, but as a counsel. More like a suggestion. He says, if you'd like to leave it because it's good for you. Those who leave it are on a higher spiritual plateau. They go on interpreting it like that. They say, if you have left everything, then you are a very special person. You are better than the other Christians who have never left anything. You are on a higher level. Now, I meet such Christians also. Even in the modern days, there are people like that. You know, they think if someone has left everything voluntarily, even though they don't preach to others saying, you leave also, we have left, you should leave. They don't preach that. But these people look at those people that have left everything and chosen to live that type of life. They look at them as more spiritual, their poverty as something that is that has got some virtue or something like that, you know. There is some spirituality or something. And this is the way they interpret it. Voluntarily we left it, they say. But there are some things that are wrong in it also, in that kind of interpretation. What is wrong with it? When Jesus said you must sell everything, give everything to the poor and come and follow me. If a man will not give up all these things, he cannot come and follow me, he says in Luke chapter 14. Now, it doesn't look like to me that he was saying that this is a voluntary option. He did not say, if a man would like, if a man is pleased enough to give up all these things, I will be very pleased. No, he didn't say, if you'd like, you give it up. No, he said, if a man does not leave everything, does not sell everything, does not give it to the poor, he cannot come and follow me. So it doesn't look like it's voluntary. He's talking about something else. Jesus is talking about something that everybody must do. And so that kind of a leaving, selling, giving is referring to something else other than this kind of a voluntary choosing of poverty. Right? Where you choose to live in poverty. It's talking about that at all. The second thing that is a problem with that kind of interpretation is this. When they say that Jesus said this, but this is not a condition or command, it's only a counsel, they assume that Jesus' demand entailed poverty. That Jesus was telling us to be poor. Voluntarily you can become poor. That's what they're saying. Jesus was recommending that voluntarily you can become poor. Now that is something that is not right. Because there is no indication to show that Jesus wanted anybody to be poor. Not at all. No indication such as that anybody needs to be poor. Thirdly, the third way of interpretation is the classical Protestant interpretation. And since the Reformation, this has been understood, these radical demands of Jesus have been understood in this way. They say that Jesus became poor. They accept the fact that Jesus did become poor by coming into the world, that Jesus became poor. But they say he became poor because of the unique role he had to play in redemptive history. He came as a redeemer to save us. Therefore, he had to become poor. It had a reason. We don't have to become poor. Remember, the Protestant theologians are the ones that taught about work and calling and all of that. They said, you've been made in the image and likeness of God. You've been given something. God has given you abilities and talents. And if you work with it, you'll live a very useful life. And that will produce prosperity for you. Prosperity is the byproduct of faithful work, good work, using talents, cultivating talents. And they taught that. So they didn't go into poverty for all of us, you know. But they did accept the poverty of Jesus. They believed that Jesus indeed became literally poor, financially poor, materially poor. And he did become poor because of this reason, that he came to save us, and for that he had to become poor. He had to live in poverty and embrace poverty. And the disciples with him also had to join him, leaving everything. They also had to embrace poverty. This was only for a temporary period of time for the sake of carrying out the redemptive work that he came to carry out. Jesus came to die on the cross, preach the gospel, die on the cross, provide salvation for us. The disciples joined him, so they had to join him, leaving everything, and they had to become poor also. Jesus became poor, they also became poor. It's not for everybody, it's not for now. It is for that time, they say, that particular time. Now, there's a problem with that also. It's a classical Protestant interpretation. The problem with that is Jesus directs all of his followers to abandon everything in some sense. And in what sense? You will understand a little later. It is true that Jesus directs all of his followers to abandon everything in some sense and then to follow him. To confine that command or demand, that radical demand, to one particular moment in history or period in history is improper. That's the problem with it. To say that it fit his life. See, what they're saying is, like, for example, you can't say Jesus didn't marry, therefore I'm not going to marry. Because Jesus didn't marry because he was only going to be here 33 years. Why does a man who's going to go away and knows that he's going to go away for 33 years and he's simply visiting here for 33 years and going to live no longer here, why would he marry and entangle himself with a family life? So he never married. For the sake of redemptive work, he refrained from marrying. So they say you cannot use that as an excuse to not to marry. You can't say Jesus didn't marry, therefore that's my pattern of life. No. For the sake of redemption, he did not marry, not for anything else. God has said it's not good for a man to be alone, so you should marry. You shouldn't follow that example. That is only fitting for him. For the sake of redemption, he came, he never married because he was going to leave the world in 33 years. Similarly, the poverty also, he accepted only for a period of time in this earth. And it was only for a period of time he accepted it because of the redemptive work that he came to do. This is the way they present it. And then they say that disciples also adopted lives of blessed poverty. Remember, he blessed. Blessed are those who are poor. So they say the disciples also adopted lives of blessed poverty and so on. But that creates a real problem when they say the disciples of Jesus embraced the life of blessed poverty. That creates a lot of problems with the interpretation of the scriptures. Because if they embraced blessed poverty, then what happens to the original design paradigm that God set when God made man? He said, you shall have dominion. He made man in his image and likeness. He's got to live with a certain level of dignity. That he's got to enjoy all of God's creation. He's got to rule over it, but also enjoy it, derive some benefits from it and enjoy it and use it for his own good. And also it creates an interpretive problem. You know what kind of interpretation problem? There are disciples who followed Jesus, like Joseph of Arimathea and others, like Peter's mother-in-law, and the women that ministered to him through their wealth. The Bible literally says that there were women that went with him, followed him, that ministered to him with their wealth. That means these are rich women that brought their finances into the ministry and blessed Jesus' ministry with their finances. Many people can minister in many ways. If you know how to sing, you sing. If you know how to play music, you play music. Or if you can do some physical work, you do. Some people have a lot of money, and so they help financially in ministry. And there were women that were ministering financially, helping the ministry of Jesus. The Bible literally says that they ministered with their wealth. Those people they're followers of Jesus, real followers of Jesus. They never left anything. They kept everything, and they used it for good things. And so there's a real problem in interpreting these things. So how do we interpret these things? Now, if you wrongly interpret, see, for years together, there has been a wrong trend to say that Jesus was poor, the disciples were poor, and the logical conclusion is, therefore, we as the followers of Jesus must be poor. And the whole thing I'm talking about last week and this week is, should the followers of Jesus be poor? I talked before that about Jesus and said, was he poor? And I answered the question. Now we're talking about, should the followers of Jesus be poor? Is that what the Bible teaches? You know, when Jesus started his ministry, Luke chapter 4 says in verse 18 that he came into a synagogue at the beginning of his ministry and makes a declaration literally. when he read a particular passage. He read from Isaiah 61, verse 1 and 2. Remember that? He said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. He has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor, to heal the brokenhearted, to set the captive free, and so on. And then he says, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. Right? He's quoting from Isaiah. And the first item he mentions is preach the gospel to the poor. So people have said that the gospel is to the poor only, And so they categorized Christianity and Christian followers as poor. Only poor had the gospel. John the Baptist sent someone to inquire from Jesus, are you the one to come, or should we wait for another? He told John's followers, he said, go and tell John, the blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the gospel is preached to the poor. So people have come to the conclusion the gospel is for the poor. So gospel came to the poor, and anybody else that wanted to follow the gospel had to become poor, give up everything and become poor. So whoever follows the gospel, these people that believe in the gospel, people that believe in Jesus, Christians, are basically poor. And so from 2nd century onwards, they used this to question the credibility of Christian doctrine. They said, how can you believe these poor people's word? They don't know anything. They have nothing. They own nothing. They have nothing. They're just poor people, insignificant. Don't listen to their words. Remember in Proverbs it says a poor man's word amounts to nothing. Nobody hears a poor man's words. So they said the Christian doctrines are questionable because it's poor man's doctrine. All these people are poor people babbling something, talking about some man who died on the cross. Don't believe that. That kind of a attitude. But recently, some of the great Bible teachers have taken the effort to show that it is not so. They say the followers, talking about the followers of Jesus, whether they are poor, they say the followers of Jesus can be classified into 3 groups. One is the disciples of Jesus, the 12, the 70, and some other women that followed him and went around with him and ministered to him and so on. Those kinds of people, the ones that left everything and went after him. Now, it's commonly assumed that they are poor. But really, they were hardly poor. Peter and such people came from a fishing profession. Now, in Galilee, they say fishing profession was doing very well. Their fish was one of the main foods in that area. They were doing quite a good business. And if you're a fisherman, and especially if you had boats and nets and servants like Peter and others had, some of the disciples had, it means they had a thriving fishing business which caused them to live at a middle class level. So it's wrong to say that they were poor. Now, surely Peter's mother-in-law was not poor. And when they say, I asked one man, he said, Peter and John, everybody left everything and came and followed. I said, are you sure they left everything? Like you're thinking they left everything? Because when his mother-in-law was sick, Peter didn't forget his mother-in-law and said, if you're sick, let the sick attend to the sick, or let the dead bury the dead. I am here in the ministry. I have left everything. I don't know. He went and took Jesus and went to her house. And Jesus ministered to her and she was well. And she obviously had a big enough house to hold Jesus and all the disciples that went with him and show hospitality to them and so on. So it's not like you cannot take it in a simplistic way like this. The gospel said they left everything and followed him, talking about the disciples. If they didn't have anything to leave, and if they came from a very poor, poverty-stricken background, the Bible would not say that they left everything to follow him. What will be there to leave? If they didn't have anything to leave and follow, the Bible wouldn't say that they left everything to follow him. Matthew, for example, was a tax collector. He's pretty well-to-do man. The Bible says he had a house. He invited Jesus to his house and the disciples to his house and all of that, when Jesus called them to follow him. So obviously, leaving everything is not like what you think, what people commonly think. The second group is the other group of followers, or network of sympathizers, who followed Jesus by staying where they were continuing in the things that they were doing before and keeping the things that they had before, but yet they followed Jesus. In this group were Mary, Martha, Lazarus, Joseph of Arimathea, who took the body of Jesus and buried in his tomb. Bible says he was a wealthy man. Remember that woman who was actually a prostitute at one time, and now she's converted, and she thankfully comes to Jesus and breaks an ointment bottle. The ointment was worth 1 year's wage, an average man's wage. Has anyone here bought a perfume that's worth 1 year's average wages of a man in India? I wonder if anybody has bought something like that. 1 year's wage. In today's amount, I don't know how much it will come to. 1 year's wage, an average man's wage. She just came and broke it and worshipped Jesus with it. Now, all these people had some means. What I'm trying to say is they were not all poor and had nothing, and they were like beggars, or didn't even have a place to stay or something like that. To say something like that is wrong. So these people that had some means and that were well-to-do provided the funds and provided Jesus a base of operation, provided moral support in towns and communities. So we find no stereotype of such kind that all the followers of Jesus were poor and all of that. All that is wrong assumption, wrong ideas that have been spread unjustly, wrongly. The third group is the multitudes that follow Jesus. Multitudes that followed Jesus. Now, in this multitude, I can imagine there may have been a lot of materially poor people. You have to say that. A lot of blind, deaf, people who cannot walk, and people who had some incurable illnesses that came to them for him for healing. So I'm sure there's a lot of poor people that followed him, oppressed in society, rejected in society, and so on. So they followed him. But even in that, even among them, look at this Roman centurion. The centurion servant was healed by Jesus, right? That centurion is not he's not a poor man. He's head of 100 soldiers in the Roman army. The chief tax collector, Zacchaeus, he was a rich man actually, and so on. So these people were among the multitudes that came and followed Jesus. So when the Bible says the gospel was preached to the poor, you got to be careful in interpreting the word poor in Luke. All the Bible scholars, people that study the book of Luke very deeply, go into it and analyze it and everything. Everybody says the word poor must be carefully understood when it comes to the book of Luke. Because the word poor does not mean literal poor, financially poor, materially poor. It goes beyond material poverty and goes into a metaphorical meaning. For example, that woman that was a prostitute was poor in one sense. What sense? She was poor socially. She was socially unacceptable, cast away from society. The tax collector Zacchaeus was socially unacceptable. They were socially poor. The poor have the gospel preached to him, therefore, does not just mean the poor who didn't have any money. That's what I'm trying to say. The poor meant all kinds of poor, the socially poor. And people that are poor in other ways, You can be poor in so many ways, Those kinds of people had the gospel preached to him. So just because the Bible says the poor had the gospel preached to him, it doesn't mean that Jesus preached only in the poor section of the town and stayed with the poor, lived with the poor, identified with the poor, and he himself was the poor. That kind of interpretation is very simplistic. It cannot be accepted because the poor here and the rich also, the word rich also refers to the metaphorical sense. It goes beyond the literal meaning of poor and rich into a deeper meaning, Many times the poor are the powerless and in so many ways, Many times the people are poor because of their sickness, and so on. the socially poor and in poor in so many different ways.
I will rejoice. I'm gonna lift my voice and worship you. Glorify your name among the nations. Oh, I will rejoice. In everything I will give thanks to you. For you have been my help and my salvation. I will rejoice. I'm gonna lift my voice and worship you. Glorify your name among the nations. Oh, I will rejoice. In everything I will give thanks to you. For you have been my help and my salvation. Every step I take, I feel your love around me. I cannot escape your grace. I cannot explain the blessings that surround me. I can only sing your praise. Oh, I will rejoice. I'm gonna lift my voice and worship you. Glorify your name among the nations. Oh, I will rejoice. In everything I will give thanks to you. You have been my help, my salvation. I will rejoice. I'm gonna lift my voice and worship you. Glorify your name among the nations. Oh, I will rejoice. In everything I will give thanks to you. That you have been my help and my salvation. I made a choice to offer up thanksgiving, lifting up your holy name. I will lift my voice, come before you singing with a sacrifice of our praise. So I will rejoice. I'm gonna lift my voice and worship you. Glorify your name among the nations. Oh, I will rejoice. In everything I will give thanks to you. You have been my help and my salvation. Everybody, oh, I will rejoice. I'm gonna lift my voice to worship you. Glorify your name among the nations. Oh, I will rejoice. In everything I will give thanks to you. That you have been my help and my salvation. You've been my help and my salvation. Lord, you have been my help and my salvation. You have been my help and my salvation.